In today's video, I'm going to dive deep all about underlay, and I'm going to click on the yellow portion. So this is a full fill, and this is a continuation from our 10-part series, understanding the settings of embroidery. And really, if you understand the settings of embroidery, really it takes away the whole fear of making adjustments. And in embroidery, we constantly have to make adjustments, because as we're changing size or we're changing garments, sometimes you got to make a little small tweaks. So today, when we talk about underlay, which is really one of the most important settings in all of embroidery, I'm going to talk about when you should use underlay, what underlay you should use, and how to go about easily making adjustments. And sometimes we're just talking about small little millimeters of a change, which could drastically change the quality of your stitch out. So this is part 2. It's a continuation from my last video of this series, which was density. And really, density and underlay, they're really like brothers, because when they are used correctly, they work together. So let's look at the X-ray. I call this view here the X-ray view, because we can see through the thread, and we're kind of seeing like the inside of our embroidery. So you can see right now our fill stitch. Actually, let me hide this outer border. We don't need it right now, so let's hide that. Let me change this color again to maroon. Our thread is just running parallel, right? This is just a 1 stitch angle, and you can see my stitch angle here is at a 15 degree. So everything is running parallel at a 15 degree. Now, the issue that we can have, if we were to leave this file the way it is like this, we wouldn't get like a perfectly squared M. We'll start getting some slants. Let me show you a quick example of what I'm talking about. So here, let me create a rectangle / square here. Let me set this stitch angle. So when I say that the stitch angles, they're like the bones of our design. If we were to stitch this out with 0 underlay, so you can see here I don't have any underlay, it's all running perpendicular. In reality, when we stitch this out, it's not gonna look nice and squared right here. What's gonna do, it's gonna start looking, right? It's gonna start looking like a rhombus. We start getting our shapes, doesn't have any structure. So instead of looking nice and squared, we're gonna have some slanting, definitely some push-pull going certain directions, and some sides are gonna push harder than other sides. So of course, we want our stitches to look nice and straight. Turn this into a circle. Okay, all I'm doing is changing these to rounded corners. If we were not to have any underlay, same thing. Wherever we're pushing or wherever we're pulling, it's gonna start looking like an egg. All right, I know everybody has seen those designs where you want it to look like a circle and it looks like an egg, where these sides go in and then the top part pushes out a bit, right? We're all familiar with the egg theory with our circles. So without underlay, we lose the actual shape. We lose our nice rounded circles. We lose our nice rounded squares. In a situation like that, here, we want to have nice, straight, sharp corners, and we want the letters to look like it has structure. There are rules with underlay. We can't just throw underlay and any underlay is going to work. The good thing, so you can see here in my object properties, I have my settings here. So I'm going to go to underlay, and I'll put my first underlay. Definitely I'm not using a zigzag. Zigzags is more when you have a satin stitch. That's when you want to use a zigzag underlay. For a fill stitch, a tatami, we're definitely going to counter it with a tatami underlay. So we clicked it here. You see I have my 3 settings here. So really these 3 settings are going to play a major role on how we're going to keep our design nice and structured. Before I start tweaking the settings, now you can see my underlay. My underlay is running perpendicular, and that really is the rule of underlay. So I'll say the rule of underlay, especially tatami fill stitches, is you want your underlay to run perpendicular to your top stitches. So these are your top stitches. This is what we see. Our underlay should run perpendicular. So you can see here, it's running perpendicular, which is 90 degrees. And here on my settings, the software already has it set for you at 90 degrees. There's going to be times where we do change it a bit, but what you don't want, this is major right here, what you really don't want is your angles to be running the same as your top stitches. So if we were to put 0 degrees here and we keep it parallel, that really defeats the purpose of the underlay. All you're doing is adding stitches on top of our top stitches. This is really the major part what we don't want to do. We do not want to run parallel to our top stitches. We want it like this. So they're like, picture it like joist in your house. When you put the flooring, you frame up your house, then you put the joist before we put the drywall or the flooring. Same concept here. You want these underlays. These underlays, this is what our top stitches are gonna rest on. And my formula for fill stitches like this, I like putting a tatami fill. We have some options because we have a second underlay that we can use. We can put another tatami. Okay, we could run, but if you were to put a first underlay tatami, then a second underlay tatami, you might as well just put a double tatami. Now it's a crisscross. Now when we zoom in, you can see that crisscross underlay. It cut the stitch angle in half, and now it put it at 45 degrees. And the reason why they changed it to 45, because if we were to keep it at 90 like before, we would have one underlay running parallel. So the software here, it's using like intelligent math here. It knows what is the main objective of the underlay. It knows that the top stitches should lay nice and flat on top of it. The reason why I say density and underlay are like brothers and they kind of complement each other, because if we increase the underlay, there's a small chance that we could kind of open up the density. We can make it a little less dense, so we can open up the spacing, let's say 44. So we'll go from 5700 to about 53. So that's a difference of about 400 stitches, which we already know every stitch count, because it can make it a little lighter. So a lot of times if you want to make something less dense, sometimes you could tweak the underlay and it'll make it a little less thick than what we have. And in the upcoming videos, I'm going to start stitching these out so we can start seeing the differences in underlay and density. In reality, what I would do, go back to underlay, I'll just keep it as a single tatami underlay. But what I like to do, I like to add this edge run, and that edge run is just gonna run around the perimeter of our shape. So here you see going all around the perimeter, that's our edge run. So let me show you what we've done so far. So this is our underlay right now running. This is the tatami, and then it's doing the edge run. So you can see how it's running the perimeter. All right, to me, this is like a strong base to keep our design nice and sharp. And now it's going to start the actual stitch out. So this is what our underlay looks like. So you can see we built the foundation. That's what I call the underlay. It's a foundation of your embroidery. If you see that your stitches are not lining up, they're not being straight, they're looking oval when they're supposed to be a circle, or they're looking like a rhombus when they should be a square, most likely is because you do not have the correct underlay. And the more underlay that you add, the less density you could probably get away with. We have our 3 settings here. Spacing, we already know it's our density, so you can see how it's opened up, right? Because it's for underlay purposes. If you want to go open it up even more, 6 millimeters, maybe sometimes you don't need as much underlay. Sometimes you know you're too dense. If your design starts curling up, like you could feel when a design is too thick, too dense. The standard setting here on Wilcom, usually it's like 99% of the time you're good just with the default setting. tweak a couple stuff. So you know the spacing, you're not going to break anything by creating more space, right? So 6mm, you're just going to expand it a bit. But what you don't want to do, you don't want to go and put double stitches, like maybe like a 1mm. It might be too much now. Okay, see how much crisscrossing there is? You just want enough so the stitches lay nice and flat on top of it. That's why we have a length of 4mm. So that's kind of like a good distance here. And this 4mm, when we put our dots right here, what that's telling us, from this distance to the next one, that's 4mm. Really, this is kind of, it's not short. I wouldn't say this is a short length. It's good enough so your top stitches lay on top of those threads. Now let's talk about our satin stitch. Now our underlay rules kind of change a bit, because now we're going from fill stitch to satin stitch. The rules of underlay for a satin stitch, it really depends on our distance. So let's see here, we're looking at a 2.5mm satin stitch. So it's not like a super big satin stitch. It's kind of like a nice sweet spot, right? What we don't want to do is overload the underlay, and that's really the main rule for a satin stitch, is do not overload the underlay. And what I'm talking about there is we don't want to load it up with like a edge run plus a double zigzag. That's like worst case scenario right here. What's going to happen if we have too many stitches under? The underlay is going to start sticking out of our top stitches. That's what we definitely don't want. Especially, let's say if we're like at a 1.5. If we're at a 1.5, we definitely don't want these settings as an underlay, because our underlay is going to start sticking out. So really the rules here is just going to be like, when it's a small satin stitch, let's keep it with a center run. You should be safe with a center run. And our settings here, 2.2 is a safe setting. Very run length. We want to keep the very run length here. Okay, that's just talking about when we're hitting corners. We want the software to automatically adjust our distance, but we don't want it to go below 0.8mm. So it's just kind of like a safety mechanism, this one, which I wouldn't change. Unless you have a very good reason to change it, you don't really have to change this one. This one here, length, for the most part, for a regular satin stitch, you should be good with 2.2. The only time I would change it is if you're dealing with text less than 5mm of height. In that situation, I would probably bring it down to probably like a 1.8. Now, as our satin stitches start getting bigger, let's say I'm working with like a 6mm satin stitch. Wow, this is giant, right? Let's do 4. And of course, we could use 6mm. There's nothing wrong with that. We would just make some adjustment there. But let's talk about 4mm. Now, as we start getting bigger, now we want to add structure to our satin stitch. So maybe this center underlay might not be enough. In this situation, this is when we start adding more underlay. So we might put an edge run. You can see the edge run. It's running on the edge, both sides. With Wilcom, we have power to control this. So right now it's at a 0.35 of a distance. If I want more, if I want it to come in a bit, 0.6, let's do something crazy like 1.7. Right? It pushed it all the way inside. There's times where you might want to do that. Or let's say you want to be a little closer to the edge and you want less, we could go like 0.10, right? Now it's going to go closer to the edge. So 0.35 is usually a safe spot. If I have a curvy satin stitch, like something that's hitting tight curves, I might bring it in like 0.7. Sometimes you'll have underlay sticking out, right? That's usually a big problem that we have in embroidery, is the underlay sticking out. Maybe you might want to tuck it in a tad bit. So we could tuck it in through there. So we use center run. Now for my second underlay, that's when the zigzag, very popular with the satin stitch. And the bigger you get, right? Once we start getting about 6, 7, 8mm, now we might want to go with a double zigzags. All right, so this would be our edge run. Right, you can see how it's forming a base. It's getting strong right now. Now put that first layer of zigzags. And then you could put that double if necessary. Now, one key element, we have to remember that we still have that fill stitch underneath. So that acts also as structure. Maybe if we just had the sand stitch by itself, then we might need this much underlay. But since we have a fill stitch right under that, it's providing structure too. So we might not need, in a situation like this, we might not need this much underlay. And a lot of this, like, how do you know all this information? It might just be testing out your sample. You could sense when it's too dense. If it's too bulky, you might want to take it back a bit. And then the actual stitches come on. So something like this, it's going to give us nice straight lines. But if we take away the underlay, our lines might start curving, and then we don't look as sharp as we should be. All right, so let's keep it at 2.50. So for this satin border, I'm going to keep it center around with a zigzag here. Change the color. In our upcoming videos, I'm going to start stitching this out so we can start seeing what's happening and what is the difference between certain densities versus certain underlays. All right, once we start understanding the relationship between densities, underlays, and we start adding the other settings that we're going to talk about, now digitizing is going to start making more sense. And the more we know what's happening under our embroidery, the easier it is to make decisions and changes when something's not looking right. Okay, so this is part 2. I want to thank you for stopping by. Please share this information with the entire embroidery community, and I'll see you in the next video in part 3. Peace.